Dun, dun. I should have opening music. That's what I keep thinking. Dun, 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 dun. That sounds a bit oppressive. I don't know. Maybe it should be more like. I don't know. What do you all think? Should every live broadcast start with opening music? If so, maybe I'll start working on that and have a cache of music ready to play. It's Doc Beanz reading 420 News with views you can use. Absolutely. I do enjoy speaking to people in the cannabis industry. I have worked in the cannabis industry myself for the last several years as an SEO and content creator and web designer and all around kind of digital marketer and content marketer for people in the cannabis space. That's not what this is about, though. I've always had a passion for studying about weed world news. I've always been an advocate of cannabis for a long time, ever since, way back longer than I care to remember. But that's what I want to do. And that's what I want to bring to you today. Not everybody has a chance to follow along with what's happening in the world of weed. But first, let's go ahead and start with our daily dose of Doc from Generation of Swine, published, I believe, in 1988. And Hunter S. Thompson says in his author's note, quote, "And I will give him the morning star," end quote. That is from Revelation once again. I have stolen more quotes and thoughts and purely elegant little starbursts of writing from the book of Revelation than anything else in the English language. And it is not because I am a biblical scholar or because of any religious faith, but because I love the wild power of the language and the purity of the madness that governs it and makes it music. I couldn't agree more with Hunter S. Thompson. He was actually one of the reasons why I decided to go into journalism. I enjoy telling stories. I enjoy following along with passionate subjects, is what I was going to say, or subjects that I am deeply passionate about, and cannabis is one of them. So tell me, what are you smoking and why? This is kind of like a digital smoke session. I'll sit around and we can talk about weed world news all you want. So welcome back to 420 News that you can use. It's nice to have you along with us. First story up on the docket. Since the presidential debates and vice presidential debates have been going on, and since Amy Corritt, what's her name, Browning? I'm not sure, is being grilled for the position of Supreme Court Justice, there's a story in today's paper about Senator Cory Booker, Democrat, New Jersey, raised the issue of racial disparities in marijuana enforcement and the broader war on drugs during his questioning of Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett. I don't really care. Amy Coney Barrett, ACB. Amy Coney Barrett on Wednesday. The senator, an outspoken advocate for cannabis reform, was making the point that those racial inequities are part of a systemic problem in the United States judicial system that has marginalized and often disenfranchised communities of color. Quote, "The war on marijuana in 2017, there were more possession of marijuana arrests in America than all the violent crime arrests combined. Overwhelmingly and disproportionately African American people," he said. My point is, you see that if a black person is not more likely to use marijuana, but they're more likely to be convicted of a felony for it at some three to four times the rate of white people. I hope you can see that means that they're going to be more likely to lose other liberties, other rights, and so deeply affected their lives. Booker went on to say Their voting life, their ability to raise their children when a parent has been put in a position where now, because of that felony conviction for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitting to doing, they now can't vote, they now can't get jobs, and they now can't get business licenses, the former Democratic presidential candidate said. This is such a deeply affecting system that it is disproportionately harming one class of citizens based upon race. Do you agree with Senator Booker? I'm inclined to be in agreement, since I am a staunch critic of the prison industrial complex that uses weed as a vehicle to fund exponential growth when it's not needed. Weed used to be illegal in America. I'm getting off track. I'll be happy to get back to that plenty more as we go along. Let's see, back to our story. While he didn't ask Barrett any specific questions on cannabis policy issues, the senator did ask whether she's read any books or articles that delve into racial disparities in the criminal justice system. He cited The New Jim Crow by civil rights advocate Michelle Alexander as an example. The would-be justice replied that she couldn't recall having done any such specific reading, but throughout her academic career did have regular discussions about the topic. Okay. Booker recommended the same book to now Justice Brett Kavanaugh during his confirmation hearing in 2018. Earlier at Wednesday's hearing, the senator more broadly discussed the racial inequities of the war on drugs. Cory Booker said, "One of the greatest drivers of disparities in the justice system, I've worked with partners of mine on both sides of the aisle, has been the so-called war on drugs, which really is a war on black and brown people because of the outrageous disparities," he said. "There's no difference between blacks and whites using drugs or even dealing drugs in America, but blacks are multiple times more likely to be arrested." We're talking about Cory Booker grilling Amy Coney Barrett. I think I've got that down. Amy Coney Barrett. We're talking about him questioning her on her role as a Supreme Court justice. Booker went on to say, he said that significant sentencing disparities for crack versus powder cocaine is one of the most tragic examples of how this problem has played out. Under that system, he said, someone caught with the amount of crack cocaine the size of a candy bar would get roughly the same sentence as someone caught with a briefcase full of powder cocaine. And it just so happened to be the case that black people were more often arrested with the latter substance. What do you think? She didn't actually respond to most of what Booker was talking about. I wonder if she'll actually go back and read that book to try and get a better view of what Booker was trying to talk about. So that was story number 1 in Weed World News. While it didn't come up specifically as cannabis reform, Cory Booker is actually asking questions about the prison industrial complex, which ties into the cannabis space, because that's how they fund those prisons, with poor people who have been thrown in jail for a naturally growing plant. Virginia governor signs marijuana reform bill as state's first medical dispensary prepares to open. It's about time, right? The governor of Virginia signed a modest marijuana reform bill into law this week, a move that comes days before the state's first medical cannabis dispensary is set to open. Governor Ralph Northam, Democrat, who approved legislation to decriminalize low-level marijuana possession earlier this year, she agrees, put his signature on a bill that will allow people issued summonses for the offense to prepay their civil penalty rather than having to show up in court. The bill is one of several dealing with the cannabis reform, dealing with cannabis reform that have advanced in the Commonwealth during a special session. For example, Northam has until October 21st to act upon separate legislation that's also on his desk that would make it so police could not, quote, stop, search, or seize any person, place, or thing solely on the basis of the odor of marijuana, which is long overdue, considering there's smokable hemp, which has no THC in it, that smells exactly the same. It's no longer a reason to use as an excuse to bust people. Bills to facilitate the expungement of prior convictions, including for cannabis and other drugs, were also passed by lawmakers and have been sent to a bicameral conference committee, where House and Senate members have been appointed to negotiate and resolve differences between the chambers' competing proposals. Under the House measure, eligible convictions would be automatically expunged after a period of 8 years. The Senate's version, meanwhile, would allow people to petition to have their records cleared after a period of 5 years. The House bill covers more drug crimes as well. During the state's regular legislative session earlier this year, the governor and legislators also expanded Virginia's limited medical cannabis program. Hey, if you've just joined us, this is Doc Beanz reading 420 news that you can use, hopefully. We're talking about the Virginia governor signing marijuana reform bill as the state's first medical dispensary is about to open up. Back to our story. During the state's regular legislative session earlier this year, the governor and legislators also expanded Virginia's limited medical cannabis program. We already read that. And on that note, the first licensed medical marijuana dispensary, Dharma Pharmaceuticals, will be having its grand opening on Saturday, where activists with Virginia NORML will join in the celebration. Because of a regulatory change to Virginia's program that broadened the definition of what products cannabis patients can lawfully possess, organizations like NORML and the Marijuana Policy Project now consider the state to be the 34th in the U.S. to meet its definition for having an effective medical marijuana system. 34. What does that leave? 18 more, unless you're counting D.C. and Puerto Rico. Then it's an equal 20. 20 more to go, at least for medical. Now, how many are we going to talk about when it comes to recreational? That's a whole other story. And Doc Beanz ain't going to be satisfied until every last political prisoner locked up for cannabis-only offenses, nonviolent offenses, are freed. They're political prisoners, in my opinion. That's me. Back to our story. And also, what are you smoking and why? Doesn't look like I have anybody with me yet, but I'm going to continue on doing this. This gives you a chance to actually listen to it at a later time if you want. Doc Beanz also has a YouTube channel, which is a bit more of a production than this live stuff that I'm doing. I'm not just reading headlines. I'm reading headlines, but I get to do a little bit of video play too, where I get to show pictures and have all kinds of fun. So make sure you look for Doc Beanz with a Z on YouTube. Maybe I should post the link below. Because of a regulatory change to Virginia's program that broadened the definition of products cannabis patients can lawfully possess, we already read this, all of these incremental changes come as legislators continue to pursue a broader adult use legalization plan in the Commonwealth that would include a system of regulated and taxed sales and production. The decriminalization bill that passed earlier this year contained a provision that called for the establishment of a working group to study and make recommendations about adult use marijuana legalization. Can we call it cannabis legalization? Marijuana to me has such a negative racial stereotype tied to it. It's how they criminalize the plant in the first place. So I prefer not to use the M word if at all possible, and I instead refer to it as cannabis. Its scientific name, Cannabis sativa. Back to our story. The decriminalization bill, we read that. Meanwhile, the joint legislative audit, joint legislative audit, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee is doing its own analysis on ending cannabis prohibition and will similarly report on its findings before the end of the year. A bill to legalize marijuana was filed for the special session by a delegate running to replace the term-limited Northam in 2021, but it has yet to advance out of the committee to which it was referred. The governor hasn't expressed any particular interest in enacting the broader reform before he leaves office, but he is publicly embracing the state's existing hemp and CBD industry. So Virginia's governor on his way out is interested in the CBD industry, and he's leaving it open-ended as to what's going to happen in the state next. That's a good thing. Hey, how you doing? I'm Doc Beanz. I'm reading 420 News you can use. We're just going through some of the headlines, and we just finished up reading about Virginia's governor signing a bill for cannabis reform, but not all the way. Next story, USDA wants to survey 18,000 hemp businesses about how they grow and sell the crop. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, is planning to distribute a national survey to gain insights from thousands of hemp businesses that could inform its approach to regulating the industry. I'm not sure how it would inform its approach, but maybe it would give it information for its approach. In partnership with the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture and the University of Kentucky, the federal agency intends to, quote, conduct a survey to collect information from U.S. hemp producers on current production costs, production practices, and marketing practices, according to a notice to be published in the Federal Register on Friday. Hey, that's today. Happy Friday, everybody. Doc Beanz, 420 News. We're just kind of going through a story right now, looking at how the USDA wants to survey 18,000 hemp farmers. But before it can send out questionnaires, the department has to formally request approval to circulate the surveys from the White House Office of Management and Budget. And so it's opening a 60-day comment period where stakeholders can submit feedback on the necessity of its proposal and areas where the scope of the survey can be improved, among other topics. If authorized, USDA said it expects about 18,000 hemp producers to participate in the survey, which will consist of 4 main components and which it expects to take respondents a half hour to complete. I don't know. I always go back and double check everything. First, it wants data on production location, licensed acreage, planted acreage, and harvested acreage by end use. Quote, collecting this information is necessary to develop an understanding of the industry across the country, USDA wrote. Then there will be a section on, quote, production costs and practices, end quote, that touches on issues related to seeds, labor, fertilizer, licensing fees, and testing. This section dives deeper into the production costs for hemp and asks specific questions about the types of hemp, the department said. Maybe I'll give the USDA a specific voice. What do you think? That'll make it easier when I'm doing quotes, rather than it just sounding like it's being babbled out of my mouth. Which is what should happen on 420 News. It should get a little silly from time to time. Back to our story. A final demographics section will collect information on producers' ages, education levels, experiences, household sizes, and races.
The data obtained from the survey,
What do you think? Good voice for the USDA?
the data obtained from the survey will be used for forecasting hemp activity and to develop a representative understanding of hemp production practices and costs at national, regional, and state levels,
The agency said.
once the survey has been administered and the results collected, the University of Kentucky will summarize the raw data from the survey into a comprehensive report for the USDA.
This survey announcement comes 1 week after the USDA closed an extended public comment period on its proposed hemp regulations. Its initial round saw more than 4,600 submissions, but it said last month that it was reopening the feedback period in response to intense pushback from stakeholders on its original proposal. The Federal Small Business Administration said last month that the new 30-day comment window is too short and asked USDA to push it back. And it also issued a series of recommended changes to the interim final rule on hemp, which it says threatened to stifle the industry and benefit big firms over smaller companies. Gosh, I'm shocked. I'm surprised. How could that possibly be? The government stand in for larger corporations instead of the little guy? Go figure. Ugh. The Federal Small Business Administration, the SBA, said last month that the new 30-day comment window is too short. We already read this part. All told, it appears that USDA is taking seriously the feedback it's receiving and may be willing to make certain accommodations on these particular policies. The department's rule for hemp is set to take effect on October 31st, 2021, a little over a year away. In July, two senators representing Oregon sent a letter to Purdue expressing concern that the hemp testing requirements that were temporarily lifted will be reinstated in the agency's final rule. They made a series of requests for policy changes. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat, New York, wrote to Purdue in August asking that USDA delay issuing final regulations for the crop until 2022 and allows states to continue operating under the 2014 Farm Bill hemp pilot program in the meantime. Senator Cory Gardner, Republican Colorado, also called on USDA to delay the implementation of proposed hemp rules, citing concerns about certain restrictive policies the federal agency has put forward in the interim proposal. Wow, the federal government overreaching in the cannabis space? Surely that's not the case. Hey, welcome to 420 News and Views you can use from Doc Beanz. It's nice to see you all. We're reading through some of the headlines today. Virginia signs new legislation from the governor as it gets ready to open its first dispensaries. And right now we're looking about the USDA wanting to survey 18,000 hemp farmers. Back to the story, the senators weren't alone in requesting an extension, as state agricultural departments and a major hemp industry group made a similar request to both Congress and USDA in August. Purdue has said on several occasions that DEA influenced certain rules, adding that the narcotics agency wasn't pleased with the overall legalization of hemp. Amid the coronavirus pandemic, hemp industry associations pushed for farmers to be able to access to certain COVID-19 relief loans, a request that Congress granted in the most recent round of coronavirus legislation. It's about time that their tax-paying dollars were able to come back and help them out. So well done, Congress, as far as allowing the cannabis space to access COVID-19 relief loans. While the USDA previously said that hemp farmers are specifically ineligible for its coronavirus food assistance program, that decision was reversed last month. While the department initially said that it would not even reevaluate the crop's eligibility based on new evidence, it removed that language shortly after Marijuana Moment reported on the exclusion. Well done, Marijuana Moment. And that's actually where I'm reading this story from right now. 2 members of Congress representing New York also wrote a letter to Purdue in June asking that the agency extend access to that program to hemp farmers. Hemp farmers approved to produce the crop do stand to benefit from other federal loan programs, however. The department released guidelines for processing loans for the industry in May. And by the way, if this is a story that actually appeals to you as a hemp farmer, I swallowed spit down the wrong tube. If this appeals to you on a professional level, please go to the Marijuana Moment, look for this USDA story, because they have all kinds of very helpful links in there, as well as some cool graphics that you can check out too. Marijuana Moment. Great for news all the way around. It's one of my favorite sources for information on the Doc Beanz 420 News Hour. That piece was actually written by Kyle Yeager. Kyle is a frequent contributor to Marijuana Moment. I've read lots of his stuff. You got to go to the site and check out this picture. It's pretty cool. And like I said, all these helpful links. So make sure you check them out. Top Colorado Springs officials tout psychedelics medical benefits at decriminalization hearing. This is actually another hot topic. It's not cannabis related, but it is, I guess you could say, industry related. It seems to follow hand in hand with cannabis reform. A lot of psychology is being addressed through microdosing. People are starting to see that psilocybin and lysergic acid dithylamide and even MDMA are all beneficial in some degree under a doctor's care through microdosing. It's being experimented quite frequently, so it's becoming more of a thing, and I believe I just read where Michigan decriminalized magic mushrooms just last week. So top Colorado Springs official touts psychedelics' medical benefits at decriminalization hearing. Advocates pushing to decriminalize psychedelics in Colorado Springs got a strong signal that the reform move could have support from a key ally after a top local lawmaker shared a personal anecdote about a relative of his who benefited from using psilocybin mushrooms. During a city council meeting on Tuesday, members of Decriminalize Nature Colorado Springs, DNCS, gave a presentation on their proposal, which would make enforcement of laws against entheogenic substances, must have something to do with psilocybin, entheogenic substances among the city's lowest priorities. The council's president, Richard Scorman, chimed in to say that he recognizes the therapeutic potential of certain psychedelics, sharing that his sister-in-law was treated with psilocybin as part of a study following a cancer diagnosis. Quote, "She was predicted to not live and went through a lot of trauma and was able to survive," he said. She became part of a study at Columbia University on psilocybin mushrooms, and it was something that was nationally recognized, but it was something that has helped her tremendously. So it has affected my family as well. Then they have a little link that you can click on here and watch the council discuss the psychedelics reform proposal around 1 hour, 5 minutes into the video below. So if you're interested in checking out the psilocybin hearings, go to Marijuana Moment. Anthony Caballero, which is a very fun name to say when you're high. Anthony Caballero, who founded DNCS, told Marijuana Moment that the meeting, quote, went exactly as it should have, end quote, and the fact that the president proactively spoke about how he has personally seen the medical benefits of psychedelics was, quote, out of this world in terms of a response we hoped for. How you doing, everybody? Doc Beanz 420 News. We're reading about top Colorado Springs officials touting psychedelics medical benefits at a decriminalization hearing. Or a meeting. I don't know. A bunch of guys got around and talked about decriminalization. Decriminalizing a substance that grows quite naturally on cow poop. Have you ever been looking for psilocybin? Not me, just a friend, I swear. When you live in Texas, it's all over the place. Lots of cow poop there. When describing his proposal to the council, Caballero said the resolution would be uniquely beneficial to the city because of its strong military community, adding that the prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, among the veteran population should give added impetus to decriminalize plants and fungi that could help them. Quote, we could decriminalize the substances and become the trailblazers in combating PTSD and anxiety, he said. Zachary Short, a military veteran who served as a combat medic, said his PTSD symptoms have dramatically declined since he started self-administering psilocybin. He said, it's no secret that the military is the backbone of our beautiful Colorado Springs community, but we are doing this community a massive disservice if we threaten to imprison our veteran servicemen and women for consuming a plant, yes, a natural plant, that could very well save their lives. Don't we owe them the best care and treatment available and all options? Good question. It remains to be seen whether a decriminalization measure will be formally introduced by a sponsor on the council, but advocates are optimistic, especially given the president's statement. This hearing comes 1 month after the Ann Arbor, Michigan City Council unanimously approved decriminalizing entheogenic substances, making it the third city in the U.S. to do so. Oakland was the first to enact the policy change, followed by Santa Cruz. The national psychedelics reform movement has quickly spread across the country since Denver became the first city in the U.S. to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms through a voter initiative in 2019. Activists in Washington, D.C. successfully qualified a psychedelics decriminalization measure for the November ballot, and recent polling indicates that there's a strong support for the policy change. How you doing? I don't know if that's you, Mom, but if it is, I love you. Doc Beanz reading the news. 420 News you can use. I enjoy doing this while I have the time. I enjoy keeping my voice out in the cannabis space. I am actually a writer myself. That's one of the reasons why I enjoy following the news. Marijuana Moment is a favorite source of mine, even though I complained about the M word. I like how I like their style. In Oregon, an initiative to legalize psilocybin for therapeutic purposes will appear on the state's ballot. Representative Earl Blumenauer, Democrat Oregon, has formally endorsed the proposal and is raising money for the campaign. Also this November, Oregon voters will also decide on a separate measure to decriminalize possession of all currently illicit drugs and put tax dollars toward expanding substance misuse treatment. They would be trailblazers if they did. Oakland activists in July released a proposed measure to allow residents to use a variety of entheogenic substances in plant medicine healing ceremonies. And in August, they unveiled guidelines for safety and effectively participating in those ceremonies. Interested in psilocybin? It's in the news, 420 News even, as a sister chemical compound, or more like distant cousins to cannabis. They both have psychoactive effects, and they both have medicinal value, it's turning out, after decades of prohibition. Montana voters poised to legalize marijuana, new poll shows. Go figure. Y'all want to read that story? Sounds kind of interesting to me. Let's go take a look at that. Montana voters seem poised to approve a pair of marijuana legalization initiatives next month, according to a new poll. Asked about legal cannabis measures that will appear on their ballots, 49% of likely voters said they will vote for the reform, while 39% said that they oppose it. What remains to be seen is where the remaining 10% of undecided voters will land on the question. An additional 2% of respondents said they will skip the cannabis measures when voting. The survey asked a simplified version of what voters will see on Election Day. Rather than ask about both measures, one statutory proposal to legalize and separate constitutional amendment to codify that only those 25 and older can access the market. The question reads, the state ballot will ask about legalizing recreational marijuana in Montana. Will you vote to support or oppose legalization? And our friends in Montana are probably answering this question this week. I wonder how it's going for cannabis reform in Montana. As is typical with cannabis polling, more Democrats, 70%, are in favor of the policy change compared to Republicans, 27%. 59% of independents said they favor legalization. I wonder why far fewer Republicans are interested in cannabis reform. You know, it'd be real easy to lean and say, oh, well, it has to do with racism. But I don't think it's that. I think it's something else. I'm not exactly sure. The thing that's confusing to me, though, they must not know the history of hemp in this country. The fact that hemp made this country great. That without hemp, we wouldn't be here today as Americans. We might be here as English people. Pip, pip, and cheerio. Let's talk about the time that we squashed those Americans who didn't have anything to wear, no flag to fly, and no parchment to write their first draft of the Constitution on. Because that's exactly what hemp was used for. George Washington wore it, grew it. Thomas Jefferson wore it, grew it, although I don't think he was a soldier. Supposedly the first flag made out of hemp. Not actually sewn by Betsy Ross. The hubbub is. Back to our story. The results also showed that legalization is supported by most age groups except those 60 and over, with voters aged 18 to 29 backing it by a near than 3-to-1 margin. That's an awkward sentence. First one I've seen, though. So why would 60 and over people be against pot reform? It has to go back to disinformation campaigns and what they grew up knowing. What they grew up knowing was only hippies smoked weed. You know, they didn't know that doctors and lawyers and cops and judges, they all smoke weed too, as well as the common little man. You know, weed is one of those things that actually binds us all together. And I use the term bind because that's ironically why we all share that in common. Did you know your body has an endocannabinoid system built into it? Did you know that they didn't even know that your body had an endocannabinoid system until 1992? They didn't even know that the brain and every other cell in your body has special receptors on them to receive cannabinoids. By the way, I'm going to keep harping on this. Is it cannabinoids or cannabinoids? Because you smoke cannabis, not cannabis. The first time I heard the word endocannabinoid system or cannabinoid, it freaked me out, man. That's not how I say it. What the hell? Endocannabinoid system. So, yeah, man, our bodies, and actually the bodies of all mammals, and a lot of other species too, most larger species of animal have these cannabinoid receptors. And the only place that you can actually find cannabinoids in nature is cannabis. Now, our endocannabinoid system, endo meaning internal, and cannabinoid being what we've just been talking about, chemical compounds used to keep your body in balance, what's called homeostasis. That's what your endocannabinoid system does. The endocannabinoid system allows one type of the CB1 receptor, one type of the brain receptor, to interact with the THC molecule, for example, only. Well, CBD can interact with it, but it doesn't interact as well as it does with the CB2 receptor. CBD interacts with the receptor that's found primarily in the immune system. I mean, it's found throughout the body, but it's really concentrated in the immune system because that's what the CB2 receptor is for. The CB1 receptor is more neurological. That's why it can get high. So that's one of the interesting things that I think is a result of cannabis prohibition is the fact that we didn't know about this major component of our bodies until the 90s. I mean, they found the CB receptors in the late 80s, and then shortly after that, a government-sponsored survey designed to actually sow disinformation or to find information against cannabis use actually found the exact opposite. You would think that would earn a Nobel Prize in and of itself. That is a huge discovery. Something that actually keeps the body in balance. It's essential to health and welfare. It just blows my mind that they didn't instantly say, oh my gosh, we were so incredibly wrong. How stupid do we look? I'm so embarrassed. Let's go ahead and legalize the hell out of this plant and let everybody have it and be peaceful and calm and happy. That's not exactly how bureaucracy works, though, as cannabis prohibition lasted nearly 50 years. Actually, I guess a little over, because it was 1937 when the marijuana, I think it was Reform Act or Tax Act, happened in 37 by Anslinger. It eventually morphed into the Controlled Substances Act, in which weed was still unfairly lumped in as a Schedule 1 substance like heroin, because pot is just like smack. Yeah, you see pot guys laying passed out in their cars with needles sticking out of their arms all the time, because that's how we use it. No, weed is such an innocuous, wonderful substance, and it's been proven time and time again. I mean, if you're biblical, it's in the Bible. 1:11 Genesis. God gave us all seed-bearing plants. And somebody else was pointing out some interesting tidbits throughout history, too. Weed is arguably the first cultivated plant by humanity. The first paper was created with hemp pulp. The goddess of wisdom in Egypt, Seshat, had a really cool hat with a pot leaf sticking out of the top. Supposedly, Seshat created the written word to record knowledge, and so people could have wisdom. So weed was actually associated with wisdom. And not weed, hemp, because it was more the fiber and stuff like that. But you know that they knew what the flower did as well. The oldest stash of actual recreational cannabis use, or spiritual, I guess in this particular case, was found in a, get this, Caucasian shaman's tomb in China, dating back 2,700 years. How a Caucasian before the days of, that Jesus supposedly was walking the earth. How a Caucasian got over to China and became a shaman, a pot smoking shaman. Sounds like an awesome story. I'd like to know more about that. Maybe we should start making something up. Jim the Caucasian shaman. We could go there if we wanted to. What are you smoking and why? I smoke, and I think it's primarily as a self-medication for ADD. In case you can't tell by the way I bounce all over the place, I do have attention deficit disorder, so much so that when I was first diagnosed just a handful of years ago, the doctor had to lift her jaw up off the floor. Apparently, I was the poster child for ADD. And so that's one of the reasons why I do like to bounce all over the place, but that's just kind of who I am. I do eventually come full circle back around to the story at hand. Speaking of which, Montana voters poised to legalize marijuana, new poll shows. That said, the pro-legalization side has had its work cut out for a win over those voters who are still undecided by the time Election Day rolls around there in Montana, which is today. Typically, quote, typically, the status quo position is advantaged in referendums, which would be no legalization, they said. With a high voter turnout, Montana will likely legalize marijuana, assuming voters understand that both initiatives must pass and vote accordingly, end quote. I should have shared that burp with you rather than lean back. I should have just shared away. It's a new world. It's a new reality. We do like transparency. Everybody has these bodily functions. Why should we hide them just because we're on the air? I think we should share. And you all can just be grateful you're not actually here. To feel the power of the belch. Although I swallowed that one. Back to our story. The analysis also noted that the legalization initiatives could attract younger voters to the polls, which could benefit Democratic candidates who also appear on the ballot. Quote, I think it is important to think about a ballot as a complete organic entity, David Parker, a political science professor at MSU, said. Young voters strongly are in favor of the measure, and they tend to be Democratic leaning. The poll, which involved responses from 1787 Montanans from September 14th to October 2nd, is a good sign for the New Approach Montana group, the campaign behind the reform measures. But it also underscores the need to maintain their current support while convincing at least some of those outstanding undecided voters to get on board. The survey also asked about gubernatorial, Senate, and House races in the state, as well as the presidential campaign. And MSU said that of all the ballot-related questions in the poll, the response to the cannabis question was the only one outside the give or take 3.9% percentage point margin error. Go figure. For residents who value environmental conservatism, a recent endorsement of the legalization initiatives by a coalition of groups committed to that issue could be a motivating factor. The state, widely known for its public lands and parks that attract tourists from across the country, would see a significant influx of revenue for environmental conservation programs from cannabis taxes if the legalization measure passes in November. Half of the public revenue from marijuana sales would be earmarked for such purposes. If the statutory measure is approved by the voters, possessing up to an ounce of cannabis would be allowed in Montana, and people could cultivate up to 4 plants and 4 seedlings at home. The Montana Department of Revenue would be in charge of regulating the legal industry and would issue business licenses by January 1st, 2022. Existing medical cannabis businesses would be the first in line to enter would be the first in line to enter the adult use market. There would be a 20% sales tax on recreational marijuana, while the tax on medical cannabis products would be reduced from 2 to 1%. Besides public lands funding, those tax dollars would also go toward veteran services, substance misuse treatment, health care, local governments that allow cannabis businesses, and the state general fund. Not to mention all the slush funds of all the politicians in Montana and beyond. Montana voters approved a medical cannabis legalization initiative in 2004. In 2004? Wow. And later passed a 2016 expansion measure. For the current cycle, the New Approach Montana submitted their petitions for the cannabis initiatives in June. That came after they initially suspended signature gathering activities amidst the coronavirus pandemic, which they later relaunched with social distancing measures in place. In July, the group announced that data from the country officials indicated that they would make the ballot, and in August, state officials officially qualified the measures. The Montana Democratic Party adopted a platform plank endorsing marijuana legalization in June. But I guess the Republicans are sending crickets. Here's another interesting view from basically the prison industrial complex, or the outcome of the prison industrial complex, not being able to find work after you get out of jail. DC marijuana bill would encourage formerly incarcerated people to work in legal industry. A Washington, D.C. councilman introduced a bill this week that would expand opportunities for formerly incarcerated people to participate in the medical marijuana market. Councilman Robert White, Democrat, said on Monday that there's, quote, no reason why those who've paid their debt to society should be locked out of this industry any longer, end quote. You know, it's another thing. They can't work in cannabis space at all. In addition to ending the ban on industry participation by most people with felony convictions, that bill, which currently has 4 co-sponsors, would establish 2 programs meant to encourage cannabis business ownership by so-called returning citizens. One would provide an application fee waiver, technical assistance with the application, and assistance with applying for any required license for those seeking a marijuana license for a business with at least 51% ownership by formerly incarcerated individuals. The other would offer assistance in developing a business plan and a plan for raising capital for approved applicants for businesses with at least 51% returning citizen ownership. The legislation would also repeal a section of current city code that says, quote, no director, officer, member, incorporator, agent, or employee of a dispensary, cultivation center, or testing laboratory who has access to the medical marijuana at the dispensary, cultivation center, or testing laboratory shall have a felony conviction, provided that the mayor shall not disqualify any of the foregoing individuals solely for a felony conviction of possession with intent to distribute marijuana that occurred before the July 17, 2014 date. While it's not clear how White's fellow local lawmakers will approach the proposal, there have already been several attempts by the district council and regulators to build on the city's existing medical cannabis program. For example, lawmakers approved emergency legislation in May that temporarily extended a policy protecting local government employees against workplace discrimination due to their locally authorized use of marijuana. And amid the coronavirus pandemic, regulators announced last month that medical cannabis delivery services will be expanded and registration card expiration dates will be extended. So, DC, stepping up, trying to keep everybody cool. Notably, as of October 1st, the district's Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration, or ABRA, is now responsible for overseeing the medical marijuana program, taking over for the Department of Health. That's consistent with a budget proposal the mayor put forth in May that some feel is a step toward preparing for the eventual launch of the legalization of recreational marijuana sales in the nation's capital. These modest developments come as advocates and local legislators continue to push for a legal adult use market in the district. DC voters legalized the low-level possession and cultivation of marijuana for adult use in 2014, but the jurisdiction has been barred from implementing retail sales due to a federal spending bill rider that's been annually renewed by Congress. Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, Democrat, D.C., has been a particularly vocal critic of the rider, and she said in April that the coronavirus pandemic demonstrated the need to free up retail sales so that the local government can offset economic losses caused by the health crisis. Mayor Muriel Bowser, Democrat, unveiled a cannabis legalization bill last year, and part of it calls for ABRA to regulate the legal industry and for the agency to be renamed the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration. Now that ABRA is in control of the medical cannabis program, that could presumably cut down on the amount of time that it would take for recreational sales regulations to be implemented if and when broader legalization is able to be adopted. Meanwhile, DC voters next month will decide on a ballot measure to decriminalize plant and fungi-based psychedelics. Once again, psychedelics are coming into the story. Hey, thank you for joining me for the Weed World News today for 420 news views you can use. I have a fun time reading through this stuff. It takes a lot longer to actually read it out loud, but you know what? I don't mind doing it. It's one of the things that I love to do. So join me for my podcast. I like to host it on both, well, your favorite podcast provider. So I guess I need to produce one. It's been a long time since I've done it. Doc has been out of the industry for a while, but he's back now. So trust in Doc. I'll always tell you the truth. I want the best thing for you and for me and for everybody, actually. And I think I have a pretty good news and views you can use nose. Last story of the day, support for marijuana legalization in Arizona has grown significantly, 2 new polls show. Support for a measure to legalize marijuana in Arizona is rising significantly, according to 2 new polls. A firm that's been consistently tracking where Arizonans stand on candidates and ballot questions found that 55% of likely voters favor the cannabis legalization initiative in a survey released on Thursday, while 37% oppose it. A separate new poll shows 56% support among registered voters and 36% opposed. So they're pretty spot on, 55 to 56, 37 to 36. Definitely Arizonans are in favor. The larger numbers are in favor of legalizing recreational use. For the former poll, that represents a 9 percentage point increase in support. Wow, 9 percentage points. Increase in support from when the same firm asked voters about the proposal last month. The other survey released on Thursday shows a 5 percentage point increase in favor of the measure from the last round of questioning, which was also in September. Both new results are largely consistent with an internal poll Smart and Safe Arizona, the campaign behind the initiative, shared with Marijuana Moment last month. That said, this time around, the language of the question asked by OH Predictive Insights, OHPI, was different than in its prior surveys. Rather than generally ask about the prospect of legalization in Arizona, as it has until now, the new poll used the official text of the description of the measure that voters will actually see on the ballot. The law would allow, to quote, the law would allow limited marijuana possession, use, and cultivation by adults 21 or older, amend criminal penalties for marijuana possession, ban smoking marijuana in public, impose a 16% excise tax on marijuana sales to fund public programs, authorize state, state and local regulation of marijuana licenses, and allow expungement of marijuana offenses. That would be a step in the right direction. It appears that the specificity of that language and the descriptiveness of the initiative's provisions compelled more people to back it, which bodes well for supporters leading up to Election Day, which is going on right now, at least here in my secret, undisclosed mountain lair. I love saying that. It's a lot of fun to say. I'll have to show you all around sometime. You've probably seen the little tour that I did, but it's just so pretty out there right now. I wish the door was open. You want me to go open the door? I'll go open the door. Oh. Well, it's getting prettier, but the leaves are actually already falling. And it's actually a cold front blowing in my undisclosed mountain lair. That is going to shut all my doors and windows tonight. It's supposed to get down to the 30s. What's the weather like where you live? What are you smoking and why? Welcome back to 420 News you can use. We are reading about support for marijuana legalization in Arizona and how it's grown significantly, according to 2 new polls. Let's see. Another factor that OHPI identified having moved the needle is increased support among voters of certain political ideologies. There was about a 15% point net increase in favor of the policy change among Democrats and a 41% point net bump from independents, with supermajority support among both groups. Republicans opposed the reform, of course, 23% to 68%, however. The legal cannabis measure enjoys majority support from men, women, people from every geographic region of the state, and voters under age 54. The other new poll, conducted by Monmouth University, didn't use language from the official ballot description, but it did explain the main components of the measure to the respondents. Quote, "There's a measure on the ballot that would legalize the recreational use of marijuana for adults 21 years of age or older and allow residents to grow up to 6 marijuana plants for personal use. Marijuana use would be banned in public, and a 16% tax would be placed on marijuana sold by licensed establishments. Will you vote for or against this measure?" End quote. Pretty similar. It shows 69% of the Democrats, 63% of the independents, and 38% of the Republicans support the legalization initiative. So see that right there, folks. Words are important. I'm fond of saying that, and it really is true, and it's one of the reasons why I became a writer and a commentator and an interviewer and all the things that I love to do. It all has to do with words and how we interrelate with one another. Language is such a beautiful thing when it's done right. Back to that poll, when it comes to age, 68% of those 18 to 49 years old and 56% of those 50 to 64 years old are in favor of the policy change. Only 37% of those 65 and older favor the proposal, though. There is majority support for the legal cannabis measure across racial and gender groups. In addition to the top line numbers for registered voters, the university also ran various likely voter scenarios, projecting that in a high turnout situation, the measure would pass 56% to 37%. And we are seeing that across the nation right now. Huge voter turnout. While in a low turnout scenario, it would be approved by a 54% to 39% margin. The Monmouth poll involved interviews with 502 registered voters from October 9th to the 13th and has a margin of error of plus or minus 4.4 points. The OHPI survey involved interviews with 608 likely voters from October 4th through the 8th and has a margin of error of plus or minus 4 percentage points. And with less than 3 weeks left to the election until the election day, the new poll results are a promising signal of reform advocates that Arizona is ready to enact legalization unlike in 2016 when voters rejected a similar proposal. Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Mark Kelly indicated this week that he is inclined to back the legal cannabis measure. Meanwhile, Arizona isn't the only state that appears poised to approve cannabis reform this election cycle. 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 Yeah, I think that's probably how it's supposed to be. A recent poll shows that 49% of Montana likely voters are in favor of recreational legalization proposals on the ballot, with 10% of the voters still undecided. And in New Jersey, residents support a legalization referendum by a 2-to-1 margin, another survey found. If the Arizona measure is approved by voters, adults could possess up to an ounce of marijuana at a time and cultivate up to 6 plants for personal use. That'd be so cool if we were allowed to grow our own plants. It is a beautiful plant. It is so resilient. It actually extracts heavy metals out of the ground. So it kind of cleans the ground as it grows. You don't need to rotate crops when you're growing hemp. Hemp grows like 160 billion times faster than trees do, and it produces more oxygen throughout its lifetime. Hemp only grows over like 16 weeks, something like that. It's not that long a life cycle at all before you can harvest it. And when you manipulate the light cycles in an indoor grow, you can have a grow going on and in flower at any given time of the year. It's a really wonderful, miraculous, God-given sacrament of a plant. But ask me what I really think. I swear. If the Arizona measure, we read that. The measure also contains several restorative justice provisions, such as allowing individuals with prior marijuana convictions to petition the courts for expungement and establishing a social equity ownership program. Cannabis sales would be taxed at 16%. Tax revenue would cover implementation costs and then will be divided among funds for community colleges, infrastructure, a justice reinvestment, and public services such as police and firefighters. Nobody gets left out of that pie. The big pot pie. Ooh, pot pie. I never thought about that before. It probably wouldn't taste all that good. Weed has a funny taste. It's definitely distinctive. Some people enjoy it, some people don't. Most people probably don't. The seeds you can grind up into a powder for like a protein powder. It's been used for millennia. For food, for oil, for medicine, for textiles. I mean, you name it, and cannabis steps up to the plate more than any other plant I can think of. Health, that's the big one. Well, I already said that, though. The measure also contains several restorative justice provisions, blah, 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 blah. Cannabis sales would be taxed at 16%, blah, 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 blah. The Department of Health Services would be responsible for regulating the program and issuing cannabis business licenses there in Arizona. It would also be tasked with deciding on whether to expand the program to allow for delivery services. In other state cannabis news, the Governor Regulatory Review Council last week approved a measure to loosen restrictions on prior marijuana use by police recruits. So, politics are in the air. Elections are in the air. How are you voting? When are you voting? Make sure that you're voting. This is Doc Beanz signing off for Weed World News, 420 views you can use. Hey, it's been fun having you along. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. I will be back on Monday. I know sometimes I say I'll be here and I won't. There's reasons for that. Like I say, I'm a working stiff too, so every once in a while in my content management and my content creator and my content director role, I have to step up and put out a fire or have a meeting or something fun like that. So now it's saying it's having trouble playing the video. I don't know if you can see me or not. This is Doc Beanz signing off. I will be back later. Peace, love, serendipity. Take care of each other. Smoke them if you got them.